Hello guys. Today I'm going to tell you a really strange story about a handyman from the US who had a client that was, let's just say, not normal. I'm not even sure how I would react in that situation. I'll tell the story from his point of view. Anyway, let's get into it while I work on my diamond painting. I've been working as a handyman for a few years now. Nothing fancy. I fix small stuff people don't want to deal with themselves: air conditioners, outlets, microwaves, sometimes a leaking faucet or a broken light fixture. Most of my jobs come from local listings online. People message me, we agree on a time, I go over, fix the thing, get paid, and that's usually the end of it. Most of the time the jobs are pretty boring. Someone's dryer won't start. Someone's outlet stopped working. Sometimes it's just a loose wire or a blown fuse. Honestly, half the time the fix takes 10 minutes, and people are just happy they didn't have to figure it out themselves. But every once in a while you get a client that sticks in your head. This story started about a month ago. It was late evening, and I was already done with my last job for the day. I was sitting in my truck outside a gas station, checking messages on my phone and debating whether I should just head home. That's when a new message came through from a number I didn't recognize. The guy said he found my listing and asked if I could take a look at a window AC unit that wasn't working properly. According to him, it kept shutting off every few minutes and making a loud buzzing noise. That kind of repair is pretty common, so nothing about the message stood out at first. Then I noticed the time he was asking for. He wanted me to come after midnight. At first I thought maybe I misunderstood, so I asked him if he meant tomorrow during the day. He replied almost immediately, "No, tonight. After midnight, if possible." I remember sitting there in the truck for a second thinking that was a little unusual. Most people want repairs done during normal hours. Midnight AC repair isn't exactly a common request. So I asked him why so late. His answer was simple. He said he works nights from home and sleeps during the day. According to him, night was the only time he could deal with repairs. Still sounded a bit odd, but not impossible. Some people do work weird schedules. Then he added one more thing. He said if I could come tonight, he'd pay double my normal rate. I won't lie, when someone offers double for a fairly simple job, it gets your attention. I asked where he was located. He sent an address for an older apartment building on the other side of town. Nothing fancy. I knew the area. Just one of those older places with small apartments and thin walls. I thought about it for maybe 10 seconds. Extra money, quick AC job, and I was already out anyway. So I texted him back and said that was fine. I'd head over after midnight and take a look at it. He replied with a short message. "Perfect. I'll be waiting." And with that, I started the truck and got ready to drive over. Now at this point, nothing sounds too crazy yet. A guy who works nights, a broken AC, double pay. Honestly, most handymen would probably take that job without thinking twice. Okay, let's move on. The building he sent me to was exactly what I expected when I saw the address. One of those older apartment complexes that probably looked decent 20 or 30 years ago, but hadn't really been updated since. 3 floors, long narrow hallways. Dim lights that flicker a little when you walk past them. The kind of place where every door looks exactly the same and the carpet in the hallway has that worn-out pattern you see in older buildings. I parked outside a little before midnight and walked up to the entrance with my toolbox. The lobby was quiet, almost too quiet, and the whole place had that slightly stale smell older buildings sometimes have. Not terrible, just old. I found the apartment number he sent me and knocked. A few seconds later, the door opened, and the guy who had texted me was standing there. For the sake of the story, let's just call him Peter. Peter looked like he was somewhere in his mid-40s, maybe a little older. Thin build, slightly messy hair, and the kind of tired face you see on people who don't sleep much. He wasn't rude or anything, but there was something about him that felt a little tense, like he always had something on his mind. He barely said hello, just nodded, stepped aside, and let me come in. The first thing I noticed inside the apartment was how cluttered it was. Not dirty exactly, but definitely strange. There was electronics everywhere, and I mean everywhere. A couple of old flat-screen TVs leaned against one wall. 2 microwaves sitting on the floor near the kitchen area. A printer on top of a cardboard box. Laptops stacked on a small table. Boxes of cables and random parts. It almost looked like someone had taken the electronics section of a thrift store and dumped it into one apartment. None of it looked particularly expensive either. Mostly older stuff. Some of it looked secondhand. For a second, I wondered if the guy repaired electronics or maybe bought broken appliances and resold them. People do that sometimes. But I didn't ask. Like I said, most of my jobs are simple. I come in, fix the problem, and leave. Peter led me over to the window where the AC unit was installed. It was one of those standard window air conditioners you see everywhere in older apartments. He told me it had been shutting off randomly and making a loud buzzing sound before it stopped. I turned it on to see what it would do. At first it ran normally, but after about 30 seconds it started making that buzzing noise he mentioned and the compressor shut off. That usually means something inside is overheating. I pulled the front cover off and immediately saw the problem. The filter was completely clogged with dust, and the capacitor looked like it was about ready to give up. Nothing unusual for an older unit that probably hadn't been cleaned in a long time. I cleaned the filter, swapped the capacitor with a spare I had in my truck, and put everything back together. The whole repair took maybe 40 minutes. While I was working, Peter mostly just stood nearby watching quietly. He didn't make small talk, didn't ask questions, just sort of hovered there like he wanted the job finished as soon as possible. Once I finished, I turned the AC back on and let it run for a few minutes. This time it sounded perfectly normal. Cool air started coming out and the compressor stayed running. I told him it should be fine now as long as he cleaned the filter every once in a while. He nodded again, asked how much he owed me, and when I told him the price, he immediately handed me double like he promised. No negotiation, no hesitation. Honestly, the job was simple and the pay was good, so I left the building feeling pretty satisfied. At that point, I figured it was just a slightly unusual late-night repair job with a quiet client who had a weird apartment full of electronics. What I didn't expect was that Peter apparently wanted to become a regular client, because about a week later, I got another message from him asking if I could come back and fix something else. Well, a midnight repair, a tired guy named Peter, and an apartment that looks like an electronics thrift store exploded inside it. Totally normal, right? Anyway, let's get back to the story. Usually when I fix something for someone, I might not hear from them again for months. Sometimes never. But apparently Peter had another problem already. So I called him back and asked what was going on this time. He sounded irritated right away. My microwave stopped working, he said. Just completely dead. Won't turn on at all. Damn thing. I asked him the usual questions. If the display was lighting up, if the buttons responded, if anything at all happened when he plugged it in. Nope, he said. Nothing. It's just dead. Then he added, almost like it was obvious. Can you come tomorrow night and fix it? At that point, I had already figured out Peter's schedule. Everything with this guy happened at night. Same as the AC repair. He said he'd pay the same as before. Double. I told him that was fine, and we agreed on roughly the same time as last week. After the call ended, I sat there for a minute thinking about that apartment again. The thing that kept coming back to my mind was all the electronics piled up everywhere. TVs, printers, microwaves, laptops, cables. The place looked like a small warehouse for random appliances. My first thought was that Peter probably flipped electronics. You know, buying broken stuff cheap, fixing it, and reselling it online. People do that all the time. But the more I thought about it, the less that theory made sense. If a guy spends his time repairing electronics, he wouldn't need to call someone like me just to figure out why a microwave stopped working. That's basic stuff. So I started thinking maybe he wasn't fixing any of it at all. Maybe he was buying old electronics in bulk and selling them for parts, or scrapping them, or shipping them somewhere. Who knows? The point is, the whole situation felt a little strange the more I thought about it. But at the same time, it wasn't really my business. A job is a job, and Peter was paying well, so I didn't dig into it any further. The next night, I drove back to the same apartment building. Same quiet street, same dim lights in the hallway, same slightly worn-out carpet that looked like it had been there forever. Peter opened the door after a couple knocks. He looked even more tired than the last time I saw him. Same nervous energy too, like he had 1,000 things on his mind and no time to deal with any of them. Inside, the apartment still looked like a strange electronics storage room. Actually, it might have been even more cluttered than before. There were a couple extra monitors sitting on a small table now, and even more cables running across the floor. I also noticed another microwave sitting on the ground near the wall, which made the whole situation even funnier in my head. I remember thinking, so there's another microwave right there, but the broken one is still the problem. Peter didn't really say much. He just pointed toward the kitchen counter where the microwave was sitting. I plugged it in and tried turning it on. Nothing happened. No lights. No display. Completely dead. At first it looked like the microwave itself had failed, but I grabbed my tester and checked the outlet in the wall just to be sure. No power. That told me right away the microwave probably wasn't the issue. I unscrewed the outlet plate and pulled the socket out slightly to take a look behind it. The plastic inside was old and brittle, and one of the wires had almost completely slipped out of the terminal screw. It was barely hanging on. That kind of thing happens a lot in older buildings. I told Peter the microwave itself was fine. The outlet's the problem, I said. It needs to be replaced. Unfortunately, I didn't have that exact outlet with me in my toolbox. So I told him I'd have to run to a store and grab a replacement. There was a 24-hour hardware store a few blocks away, so it wasn't a big deal. Peter just nodded and said that was fine. So I grabbed my keys, drove over to the store, picked up a new outlet and a fresh wall plate, and headed back to the apartment to finish the job. I walked up to Peter's door and knocked, but it opened almost immediately when I pushed on it. It wasn't locked. I stepped inside and called out, "Peter?" No answer. I figured maybe he stepped into another room or went to the bathroom or something. The apartment was quiet enough that I would have heard someone moving around, but I didn't hear anything. So I called out again, a little louder this time. "Peter." Still nothing. I stood there for a second, holding the small bag from the hardware store with the new outlet inside, trying to figure out where he went. I took a few steps down the hallway, looking around to see if I could spot him. That's when I noticed one of the doors down the hall was slightly open. I figured he was probably in there, so I knocked lightly and pushed the door open a little more. And that's when I saw the monitors. At first I thought maybe it was just security cameras for the apartment building or something like that. But when I looked closer, I realized that wasn't what it was at all. All the screens were showing the same house. Different camera angles, different rooms, but clearly the same place. One of the cameras was pointed at what looked like a bedroom. A woman was lying on the bed asleep. The room was dark except for a small lamp on the nightstand. Another screen looked like it was showing recorded footage from earlier in the day. The same woman was walking through what looked like a kitchen, carrying a mug. On the third screen, there were photos. Dozens of them. All of the same woman. Different angles, different moments. Some looked like they were taken outside during the day. She looked like she was somewhere around 40 years old. And every single image in that room was focused on her. I remember feeling this sudden knot in my stomach when I realized what I was looking at. It didn't feel like normal security footage. It felt like someone had been watching this woman for a long time. Maybe even following her. I didn't stare at the screens for more than a couple seconds. Something about the whole situation made my instincts kick in. So I stepped back out of the room and quietly closed the door. Right as I turned around, Peter suddenly walked out from the direction of the living room, holding his phone. "Oh, sorry," he said quickly. "I was on a call." He looked completely normal, like nothing unusual had happened. I just nodded and said it was fine. I didn't mention the room. I didn't ask about the monitors. At that point, I just wanted to finish the job and leave. So I went back to the kitchen, replaced the broken outlet, secured the wires properly, and installed the new faceplate. The microwave powered on immediately once the new outlet was in place. Peter thanked me, handed me the payment like last time, and that was it. I packed up my tools, walked out of the apartment, and headed back to my truck. But the entire drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about what I saw on those screens. Something about it felt very wrong. I don't know about you guys, but if I saw something like that, I'd probably leave that apartment as fast as possible too. But the story doesn't end there. Let's get back to it. I tried not to, but it just kept popping back into my head. The monitors, the cameras, the photos of that woman. Something about it didn't sit right with me. At the same time, I kept telling myself there had to be some logical explanation for it. So eventually I decided it was better not to think about it too much. It wasn't my business anyway. I fixed an outlet, got paid, and that was the end of my involvement. I didn't tell anyone about it, not even my girlfriend. She did notice something was off though. One night we were sitting on the couch watching TV, and she asked me why I seemed so distracted lately. I just shrugged it off and said I was tired from work, which wasn't exactly a lie. After a few days, the whole thing slowly started fading out of my mind. Then about a week later, I got another call for a repair job. Thankfully, this time it wasn't Peter. It was a woman who said her washing machine had stopped working properly, and she wanted someone to take a look at it. Pretty normal request. I get calls like that all the time. She gave me the address, and we scheduled the visit for later that afternoon. I grabbed my tools, drove across town, and pulled up to the house she had sent me. It was a small, quiet neighborhood with single-family homes. Nothing fancy, but nice enough. Lawns, driveways, a couple kids' bikes leaning near one of the garages down the street. I knocked on the door, and after a few seconds, the woman opened it. And the moment I saw her face, my stomach dropped. It was the same woman from the monitors. The same woman Peter had been watching. I recognized her immediately. She looked about the same age I guessed before, somewhere around 40. Brown hair, calm expression, nothing about her seemed unusual at all. Just a normal person standing in the doorway of her house. Meanwhile, my brain was going crazy trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't some random footage. This was her, the actual house, the same rooms I had seen on those screens. For a second, I honestly considered making up an excuse and leaving right there. But that would have been weird, and I didn't want to raise suspicion. So I just acted normal. She led me inside and showed me the laundry room where the washing machine was. Apparently, it had started making a loud grinding noise during the spin cycle and then stopped working completely. I ran a quick test cycle, and within about 30 seconds, I could already hear the problem. The drum bearings were shot. That's not a quick fix. So I opened the machine up and took a closer look just to be sure. Modern washing machines are kind of a pain, honestly. Most of them aren't really designed to be repaired anymore. The drum assembly is usually one sealed unit, and replacing it means taking almost the entire machine apart. I explained that to her. The drum's basically done, I said. You can replace it, but by the time you pay for the part and the labor, you're almost at the price of a brand new machine. She sighed and asked what I would recommend. I told her honestly that buying a new washer would probably make more sense. I also gave her a few tips, because newer appliances can be tricky. A lot of the big brands look good, but aren't built to last anymore. Too many electronics, too many sensors, too many plastic parts. I told her if she wanted something reliable, she should look for a simpler model. Fewer smart features, fewer touchscreens, fewer things that can break. She thanked me for explaining everything and said she'd probably start looking for a replacement. I packed up my tools and headed back to my truck. But the entire drive home my head was spinning. Because now I knew something for sure. Peter wasn't watching some random footage. He was watching this woman. And the place I had seen on those monitors was her house. By the time I pulled into my driveway that evening, my mind was full of questions. At that point, I finally decided I probably needed to tell someone about all of this. So I figured the first person I'd talk to would be my girlfriend. I don't know about you guys, but if I suddenly recognized the same house and the same woman from those monitors, I'd be seriously shaken. That kind of coincidence would make anyone uneasy. But the story doesn't stop here. What happens next is where things really take a turn. I just started telling her everything. The moment I finished explaining everything, my girlfriend just stared at me for a few seconds. Then she said, "Okay, that's not normal." She's the kind of person who is naturally a little anxious about things like that. She follows a lot of crime stories online, watches those short videos on TikTok and Instagram where people talk about weird or dangerous situations. So once she heard the whole story, her brain immediately went to the worst possible explanations. What if he's a stalker, she said. What if he's obsessed with her or something? She started listing possibilities one after another. Maybe Peter was following that woman. Maybe he had been recording her for weeks. Maybe he was planning something. The more she talked about it, the more serious the whole situation started to sound. At one point, she looked at me and said, "You need to tell the police." I told her I wasn't sure that was a good idea. I mean, what exactly would I tell them? That I accidentally saw some cameras in a guy's apartment? But she wouldn't drop it. She kept saying the same thing. What if something happens to that woman later and you could have prevented it? That sentence stuck with me. I didn't want to imagine something bad happening and then realizing I had ignored the signs. So after a lot of hesitation, I finally agreed to at least report what I had seen. The next day, I contacted the local police department and explained the situation as calmly as I could. At first, the officer on the phone sounded a little skeptical, which honestly I understood. It does sound like a strange story. But once I explained the surveillance room and how the house from the cameras matched the woman's house exactly, they took my information and said they would look into it. A couple days passed, and I honestly didn't hear anything. Then one afternoon, I got a call from an officer asking if I could come down to the station to give a full statement. When I got there, they asked me to go through the whole timeline again. How I met Peter, the AC repair, the microwave job, the monitors, and then the washing machine call at the woman's house. From what the officer told me, they had actually brought him in for questioning after checking the address I gave them. Hearing that made my stomach tighten. For a moment, I thought maybe I had accidentally uncovered something serious. But then a few days later, that same officer contacted me again and asked if I could stop by the station one more time. When I got there, he sat down with me and thanked me for reporting the situation. He said they appreciated people being observant and speaking up when something felt wrong. Then he explained that after reviewing everything, they had released Peter. According to him, there was no crime, no charges. Everything checked out. The officer told me it had basically turned out to be a false alarm. He shook my hand, thanked me again for being cautious, and said I shouldn't worry about it anymore. But honestly, that explanation didn't sit right with me at all. So before leaving, I looked at the officer and asked him one question. Then can you tell me exactly why Peter was watching that woman? Well, that's one hell of a twist. The police picked Peter up, questioned him, and then just let him go like nothing happened. Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but now I'm even more curious about what's really going on here. Let's keep going. The officer looked at me for a second and then suddenly smiled, almost like he found the whole situation a little amusing. Relax, he said. It's not what you think. Apparently, the whole story was a lot less dramatic than it looked from the outside. Peter, it turned out, had been watching his own wife. According to the officer, Peter had convinced himself that she might be cheating on him. He had gotten paranoid about it and decided to set up cameras to keep an eye on the house while he was away. The apartment where I had done the repairs wasn't even really his place. It belonged to a friend of his who had gone traveling for a few months. While the friend was gone, Peter was staying there occasionally and keeping an eye on the place. And all the electronics stacked around the apartment, that had a pretty simple explanation too. Peter's friend apparently bought old appliances and electronics in bulk, repaired them, and resold them online. The apartment had basically turned into a temporary storage space for all that stuff while he was sorting through it. So Peter had been using that apartment as a kind of observation spot, watching his own house, watching his own wife. When the officer explained all of this, I honestly just sat there for a moment trying to process it. Part of me felt relieved. At least it wasn't some dangerous stalker situation like my girlfriend had imagined. But another part of me felt pretty awkward knowing that I had basically triggered a police investigation into this guy's messy marriage. A couple days later, I decided I should probably go talk to Peter and clear the air. So I drove back to the same neighborhood where I had repaired the washing machine. I knocked on the door, not really sure how that conversation was going to go. After a few seconds, the door opened. Peter was standing there. He looked tired again, but this time there was also a kind of sadness in his expression. I didn't waste time trying to pretend I was there for some other reason. I should probably tell you something, I said. I'm the one who called the police. For a second, I expected him to get angry, but he didn't. Instead, he just sighed and gave a small tired smile. Yeah, he said. I kind of figured that. Then he stepped aside and said, "Come in. Want some coffee?" We sat down at the kitchen table, and he told me the short version of the whole story. Apparently, he had started suspecting his wife of cheating a few months earlier. Nothing concrete, just a bunch of little things that made him uneasy. Messages he didn't recognize, late nights at work, that sort of thing. Somewhere along the way, he admitted he probably went a little overboard. Midlife crisis, he called it. Instead of talking things out like a normal person, he got obsessed with the idea of catching her doing something wrong. That's when the cameras came into the picture. In the end, he said, it turned out his wife hadn't been cheating at all. She had actually been pretty shaken when the police showed up and questioned Peter. Once everything was explained, she was hurt and angry that he didn't trust her. She had packed a bag and gone to stay with her parents for a few days just to cool off. Peter leaned back in his chair and shook his head. Honestly, he said, I probably deserved that. At one point, Peter admitted something that actually made the whole situation even more absurd. He said that their washing machine suddenly broke. His wife got worried about it and wanted someone to come take a look. Peter told me he didn't know what else to do in that moment because he was at work during the day, and later that night, he was planning to be back at the apartment, doing his surveillance shift, as he awkwardly called it. So the only idea he had was to give her my number and tell her I was a good handyman who could probably fix it. When he said that, I just started laughing because the coincidence was ridiculous. I told him, you have no idea how shocked I was when I opened the door and realized it was the exact same house from those monitors. Then, almost right on cue, his phone rang. He looked at the screen and smiled. It's her, he said. He answered the call, listened for a moment, and then his whole expression changed. The tension in his shoulders seemed to disappear instantly. After a short conversation, he hung up and looked at me. She's coming back tonight. he said, clearly relieved. She said she doesn't hold it against me. Then he laughed quietly and shook his head again. You know, he said, this whole mess might have been stupid, but it definitely turned into one hell of a story. He stood up, walked me to the door, and thanked me, not for calling the police, but for being honest about it afterward. Well, that story definitely went somewhere I didn't expect. A simple repair job somehow turns into a surveillance room, police involvement, and a guy going through a midlife crisis spying on his own wife. But honestly, I'm curious what you guys think. If you were that handyman and accidentally saw those monitors, would you have called the police? Or would you just mind your own business and walk away? And what would you think if the police later told you everything was normal? Let me know what you would have done in the comments. And if you enjoy strange stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you in the next story.